Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of The Bullet. My name is Paul Lathrop. I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. Joining me today, as he does every Legal Friday, Alex Ooley of the Forge of Freedom podcast. Alex, thanks for coming along today, man.
Yeah, great to be with you, Paul. Thanks for having me.
Should mention as we get going, Alex is an attorney, but nothing we are going to say today should be construed as legal advice. You know the drill. If you need an attorney, get an attorney, one that can specifically speak to you and your situation, not some random person on the internet. So, also, if you want to comment on what we're talking about today, which is going to be entirely one subject today, if you want to comment about the ATF's proposed rulemaking, go ahead and comment on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll get those comments up, get them on the air. We're getting all kinds of check-ins coming. One is kind of funny. Let me get this one up here real quick. Jesus Wins Berta, Michigan says, Captain is on the bridge. Okay, he's got to be referring to you, Alex, because I never got close to captain status.
You're the captain of this ship, though. That's for sure.
All right. I just want to check here. Yeah, we are getting. Oh, there we go. Okay. I wanted to get it up so I could reply to comments without replying directly on the air, and we're all set up here. So, Alex, let's go ahead and get started. For about a week, I've been reporting that the ATF has put out a proposed notice of rulemaking, and today that proposed notice of rulemaking got published in the Federal Register, which means that we now have 90 days to put public comment to that. The proposed notice of new rulemaking, your dad Mike and you did a Forge of Freedom podcast about it. I think it happened about a week ago. And basically they want every single person that sells a firearm to get an FFL and to go through all that federal scrutiny. Once this is published in 90 days, I expect about 90 days and 30 minutes to go by from now. About 30 minutes after they publish it, I expect there to be lawsuits filed. But I think they're going to go through with it no matter how many comments we put forward. What do you think, man?
I agree with you, Paul. I think the comments, especially if there are as many as I'm hoping there will be, I think may delay the process at least a little bit. But we know that this administration and this Justice Department, so-called Justice Department, I should say, is adamant about curtailing the individual liberties of gun owners. And this is one way that they're trying to do that. Essentially, they're trying to achieve not just universal background checks, but universal registration. And if it's okay with you, Paul, I'd like to share just a few paragraphs from the White House statement about this last Thursday, so it would have been August 31st. And is it all right with you, Paul, if I just read the first few paragraphs of this? Because I
Absolutely.
think they state, in not so uncertain terms, what they're after here. It says, well, I should start out, this is called the fact sheet from the Biden-Harris administration. Takes another life-saving step to keep guns out of dangerous hands, which, like most government programs, sounds like a good thing, but is often not, and this is one of those. It says, in March, President Biden signed an executive order directing the Attorney General to move as close to universal background checks as possible within existing law. Today, as a result of the executive order and the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the Department of Justice is taking life-saving action to reduce the number of guns sold without background checks and keep guns out of the hands of criminals. Since 1994, federal law has required federally licensed firearms dealers to run background checks prior to selling or transferring a weapon. these background checks have helped keep guns out of the hands of more than 3 million felons, convicted domestic abusers, and other dangerous individuals. However, despite the law, individuals who should be licensed dealers have refused to obtain a license, skirting the background check requirement. Last year, Congress passed and President Biden signed into law bipartisan legislation to help address this dangerous problem by modifying the definition of who has to become a federally licensed firearms dealer. Members of Congress, both Democrats and Republicans, made clear that they intended for the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act to better protect the American people from gun violence by clarifying when someone is supposed to become a licensed firearms dealer. And this announcement from the White House goes on here, but I'll stop there, and I'll link to this in the comments to the show. But in the very first sentence, it's not hidden at all what their intention is here. In March, President Biden signed an executive order directing the Attorney General to move as close to universal background checks as possible within existing law. So that's what this new proposed rule is doing. It's moving within this Bipartisan Safer Communities Act as close as possible as they can to universal background checks. And the problem with that, and sorry, Paul, go ahead if you were going to say something there.
When you were reading what because of spacing in your reading, I found it humorous and almost interjected that as to who was supposed to get, who was supposed to submit to becoming an FFL, and the next phrase out of your mouth was members of Congress. Wouldn't it be wonderful if they all had to submit to getting FFLs and go through that invasive process?
Yeah, they're by far the most dangerous people in this country, for sure. So I could get on board with that.
All right, so go ahead. I'm sorry for interrupting.
Oh, no problem. So the problem with this, of course, is that it's not just universal background checks that they're after it's universal registration, because as it exists now, if you purchase a firearm from an FFL, the FFL is required to go through a background check. That background check goes through the NICS system, and once that background check is complete, the federal government is supposed to delete that record of that background check. They're not supposed to keep those records because that would be basically a de facto registration of firearms. Nevertheless, the FFL is required to keep a record of that transaction. And so if somebody commits a crime with a firearm and it's recovered, the government can get the serial number, go to the manufacturer of that firearm and say, hey, where did you send this firearm? What FFL did you send this to? And then they can go to that FFL and obtain the record of the transaction of who it was sold to. So there would be it's a sort of a roundabout way of registering firearms. But right now, if somebody wants to sell a firearm to a private individual, not purchase one from an FFL, there is no background check requirement. So if I wanted to sell a firearm to a family member, I could do that and no background check would be required as long as it's within the state where I reside. And that is what the government is after here, is those transactions and the so-called gun show loophole, which we can talk about more here in just a little bit.
I may be wrong here, but I've been saying for a long time, I am absolutely not a lawyer, but I've been saying for a long time that, and I think this is the case, you may or may not know differently, I think it's the case that it is illegal to knowingly sell a firearm to a convicted felon, whether you are a private individual or an FFL. It's against federal law to knowingly sell a firearm to a prohibited person. So this is all just making it double secret probation. They have the ability to come after you anyway if you sell to a prohibited person. They're just now giving themselves another way to do it.
You're exactly right, Paul. And I think this raises another great point that I've heard others make this point, but I've heard Tom Gresham make it on quite a few occasions. It's that, hey, listen, if we're going to compromise with these folks that want more gun control. Let's compromise on what gun laws we can repeal. We have thousands of gun laws on the books, including the one you were referring to there, Paul, about the prohibition on selling a firearm, knowingly selling a firearm to a prohibited person. Let's enforce the laws that we have on the books, and let's compromise by repealing the many thousands of unnecessary laws that infringe on the right to keep and bear arms and individual liberty. And I think that's exactly where we need to compromise, not compromise on what new laws we should put into effect, because we don't need new laws.
We've got a lot of comments. Let's get to a few of them here. MK wants to know, will the unfair California tax go to court? I believe it will. It has to go into effect because there has to be somebody that is harmed in order for a lawsuit to come about. So I believe it has to take effect first, and I cannot promise you. I promise you, it's on SAF's radar, but I cannot promise you who will be the first one to court with a lawsuit. But I would be shocked if it doesn't go to court. Charlie Chambers says defund the ATF, and Spartan 6 does that one better. Defund the alphabet groups, and follows up with FBI, ATF, HHS, etc.
Which raises another great point too, Paul. While you're searching through the comments, here, this is something we've talked about. I think it was when we've discussed the pistol brace rule in the past in the ATF, but this brings up another separation of powers issue that we've discussed on numerous occasions, right? So the legislature makes the law, the executive enforces the law, and the courts interpret it. Well, what's happening is that with the ATF and these other alphabet soup agencies, they are becoming de facto lawmakers. And they are, what's important to understand is that they are divisions of the executive branch, and the executive branch cannot make law. And these rules, these interpretive rules, or supposed interpretive rules, are really laws and have the effect of law. And the legislature, I think, has derogated their duty and by delegating their authority in lawmaking to these executive branch agencies. And I think that's an example of that is, like I said, with the pistol brace rule, and then also with this new proposed rule about what it means to be engaged in the business as a dealer in firearms.
Let's explore that just a little bit if we could. My reading of this is if I intend to sell a firearm for a profit, and that's where the burn is for me. I'm going to give a purely hypothetical situation that is not the case for me personally, but it could be a case for a lot of people my age. Say my dad gave me a brand new Ruger Model 1022 when it was 1978, okay? And as a 50-year-old male, I decided it's finally time to give that to somebody who's going to use that Ruger for what it was intended, for teaching a young person to shoot. And I go ahead and sell that thing. In 1978, that thing was probably worth $25, brand new. I go and I've got the original box for the thing. I've got the original magazine for the thing. I've got the original documentation that came in the box. I go to sell it, and now with all that provenance and the age of that rifle, it's probably worth $400 to $500, especially to a collector. And now, if I try to sell it for what it's worth, I have to be an FFL, and the ATF's going to come after me.
Yeah, that's the fear, because let's explore this a little bit. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which was the legislation that was passed on a bipartisan basis, the White House is bragging about. There were 14, I think it was 14 Republicans, 14 so-called conservatives who supported this legislation. And I'd be happy to provide a list of those. I don't have a list with me, but
if I remember right, 8 of the 14 did not run for re-election and retired before now. I mean, at the end of that cycle.
Yeah, which I think speculated at the time that maybe they supported this because this was actually what they believed. They were actually sort of closet gun control advocates, and because they weren't worried about re-election, they went ahead and voted for it and showed their true colors. But anyway, this Bipartisan Safer Communities Act changed the definition of engaged in the business from, and I'm going to read this here, and it's really short. It strikes this language, quote, with the principal objective of livelihood and profit, and it inserts or replaces that language with to predominantly earn a profit. And that's exactly what you're pointing to there, Paul, is what does it mean to sell a firearm with the intent of predominantly earning a profit? And that's all that was changed in the law about what it means to be engaged in the business. That's all that this Bipartisan Safer Communities Act changed. Yet, we have this 108-page monstrosity of a proposed rule that has the ATF's interpretation of what that means, to predominantly earn a profit. And that's really part of the problem with this. It's not the key problem. The key problem is that the ATF is a rogue federal agency that needs to be eliminated. But the other problem is that there's sort of this tyranny in the ambiguity of these rules. And one thing I'll mention here is that the Department of Justice, it says, has considered but not proposed in the proposed rule an alternative that would set a minimum numerical threshold of firearms sold by a person within a certain period of time. So there's been some speculation that there might be some minimum standard. If I sell 5 firearms, that means within a year, that means I'm a dealer or something like that. There is no minimum or standard. But what they said is that while there is no minimum number of transactions that determines whether a person is engaged in the business of dealing in firearms, instead, they've established an approach for determining whether an individual is engaged in the business by looking at the totality of the circumstances, which is code speak for we get to do whatever we want based on our interpretation of the law as it applies to you, or our interpretation of the rule, I should say, as it applies to you. So that's this totality of the circumstances standard is in the legal world, basically code language for the government gets to do what it wants.
You know, totality of the circumstances should mean they get incredible leeway to be lenient, and it will not.
Right.
They have incredible leniency to come down with the hammer is what it's going to come out to be. Let's get.
Oh, go ahead with the comments there. Sorry.
I want to get a couple comments in here. MK had another comment. Hunter had a background check, and then Spartan 6 followed up. MK, think about that. Hunter Biden, with all his known problems, passed a background check. I don't mean to go all left field on us, but yeah, none of this is all going to end up being politicized, at least for the next 2 years. This will be politicized until January of 2025 is the earliest Biden could get out of office. So it's going to be anybody that they can charge that is of the other persuasion, they're going to charge them with.
Yeah, I think that's right. Unfortunately.
Another good. Let me get one more. This one from Pat Hirsch, and you can tell they're communists. They don't want anybody making a profit.
Yeah.
They want the long and short of it. My view is, Alex, they want everybody to go get an FFL that is thinking of selling a gun, and yet these home-based FFLs, left, right, and center, we're hearing. I'm getting news stories about them almost every day, where another FFL is being raided by the ATF and forced to either give up their FFL or are being, in some cases, incarcerated because of innocent mistakes filling out 4473s.
Yeah, there are very strict record keeping requirements as an FFL. So that's one thing that they do to sort of chill the gun industry and to chill the exercise of the right to keep and bear arms, because we know that we have the right to keep and bear arms, which means we have the right to keep them in our home for our own defense and defense of our families, and for any other lawful purpose. And we have the right to bear arms, which means to carry. But part of that means we have to be able to obtain and access those firearms through the free market. And they're trying to chill the market of firearms to make it more difficult for people to exercise their right to keep and bear arms. And of course, this is going to limit the number of transactions that take place, at least lawfully, and it's going to scoop a bunch of otherwise law-abiding citizens into this arbitrary and completely useless new rule proposed by the Department of Justice. One thing I'd like to point out here, and I often point out John Lott, at Crime Prevention Research Center, his website, crimeresearch.org, he says that fewer than 1% of firearms used in crimes are obtained from gun shows. And it says here, I'm looking through the article here, and I'll link to this one in the comments as well. Let's see. Only 7.5% were purchased from gun shops, fewer than 1% from gun shows, and most criminals obtained firearms from the black market. So, of course, this new proposed rule making all of us law-abiding citizens become FFLs to sell a firearm would do nothing to stem crime with firearms.
Well, and my understanding, and I'm not Dr. John Lott. I do not have oodles of research in front of me that I can quote from. But my understanding is a large percentage. I don't think it's over 50%, but nevertheless, a large percentage of crime guns get that way by way of straw purchase. Boyfriend goes to girlfriend, hey, if you really loved me, you'd go buy this from me. Another large percentage are just flat stolen. Somebody breaks into a car, ooh, there's a gun in here that's mine now, along with the car, and the gun and the car separate, and the bad guy keeps the gun. Very few are gun shop or gun show.
And of course, those criminals that are engaged in straw purchases to obtain their firearms, does anybody really think that they're going to go out and get their FFL to sell that firearm before they
no
before they buy the firearm? No way.
They're going to go stick it in the back of the trunk. They're going to go down to the south side of Chicago, park on a street corner, and there it goes. Because criminals are criminal. They're going to do what they're going to do. And it's not specifically that they are looking to break laws. It's that they may know that there is a law. They just don't care. And more importantly, they don't think they're going to get caught, or if they are caught, they don't think they're going to get prosecuted. They don't think they're going to have to pay for what they do, is why they do it.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And of course, this is going back to some comments I made earlier when I was reading the White House announcement. The problem with universal background checks and then, of course, universal registration, as I'm sure almost all of your listeners know, is that universal registration ultimately is the final step before confiscation. And I think one of the best books about this problem is written by Stephen Hallbrook, Gun Control in the Third Reich, because as we know, most tyrannical governments in the history have disarmed their citizenry before subjugating them and killing millions of their citizens, ultimately. So that is, and I don't mean to sell fear here, but that is the problem that we want to avoid, is universal registration and ultimately confiscation.
Let's, and I want to get my crystal ball out here. Should they get universal registration? I don't want people to think it's registration one day, the next day, okay, now we're going to come take all of them. It won't work that way. It'll be, they're just coming for the evil AR-15s. We don't want all your guns. We just want the evil AR-15. And then, well, we still have problems, so let's go after the AK-47. Now we just want the sniper rifles, because even though most crimes are committed with handguns, we just want these powerful sniper rifles that only specially trained people in the military should be able to use. And then they'll keep walking things down until they get them all.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's that slippery slope. And of course, they'll never achieve their objective and have to go further and further down the road to complete disarmament.
All right.
But this is another, I think, good point to bring up. This is why it's so important to stay engaged, not only at the federal level with organizations like SAF and FPC and GOA, but also stay involved through those organizations at the state level and any state-specific organizations that exist in your state, because the federal government cannot implement and enforce these tyrannical rules and laws without the assistance of state-level officials. So if you have good state-level officials that are committed to the Constitution, not only of the state but of the United States, the federal government will be wholly ineffective.
I want to get a couple more comments in here. We're running down on our time, but I want to get some comments in here quick. Robert says legislation, registration, confiscation, extermination. Yep, that's the way it's going to go. And it won't, as I said earlier, it won't be fast, but it will happen. And he also commented, good book, Cautionary Tale, speaking of Holbrook's book. And one more from Spartan 6 here. Politicians tell you they see you as a criminal when they prevent law-abiding citizens from exercising constitutional rights because criminals break other laws. One more direction I want to go with this, with the few minutes we got left, Alex. I think we're getting really, really close to a whole pile of citizenry saying, I will not comply. Your rule doesn't make any sense. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not going to comply, and putting themselves in extreme danger.
Yeah, I think that if people openly defy the law, openly say they're not going to comply, they may make themselves a target. I think that ultimately, if things continue like they are, it will require people to say, I'm just not going to comply. Of course, as an attorney, I can't tell people not to comply with the law, but ultimately, the ultimate source of the law in our country is the Constitution. And anything in violation of the Constitution is not a legitimate law at all. So it may come down, and people will have to make a personal choice about whether they want to comply with those unconstitutional laws or not, but they may ultimately face fines, jail, etc. So that's a personal choice that lots of people are going to have to make, and I think that I've been encouraged. I think there are lots of us out there who want to have a free country and want to keep a free country, and I hope that that spirit carries on for generations to come.
What advice, and this is not legal advice, today is day 1 of 90. What I would give out for advice to somebody, if you're thinking of maybe selling one of your pieces of your collection, I would say do it in the next 88 days before this whole thing comes in. Also, if you're going to sell one of your collection to somebody, I would ask them to show you a concealed carry permit. That is your guarantee that they are a card-carrying good person. They've been through a background check. You don't need a 4473 to do it again. By them showing you a concealed carry permit, you know they've gone through a background check. Myself, the next time I sell a weapon will be the first time I sell a weapon. I've traded up. I've gone to gun stores and given them my firearms and used them as partial payment on another firearm, but I've yet to personally sell a weapon. We'll see. I don't know that. I'm not going to say on video that any federal agent could look up that I plan on selling a weapon. So, and I don't encourage anybody, and I will not put any comments up saying I'm going to sell a weapon. Simply because I don't want to get you in trouble for on a channel that any federal agent could watch at any time. Alex, that is our time. We're actually over time. Before we go, if you would plug Forge of Freedom podcast for us, and I'm going to, while you're doing that, I'm going to look up that specific episode where you and your dad talked about this.
Yeah, it was actually episode 57. We released that Monday. The Forge of Freedom, I often have my dad, Mike Ooley, on the show on Mondays for Monday Gun Day. We release an episode about firearms. And, of course, my dad is also an attorney. He's also a firearms instructor. And we talked about the ATF's new proposed rule this past Monday. This coming Monday, we're going to be releasing an episode about the Liberty Safe debacle and bring some of our expertise as attorneys to that analysis about how warrants and subpoenas work and about what we think are best practices with respect to that sort of conundrum about who has access to master codes, etc. So tune in for that on Monday if you're interested in that discussion. But on Fridays, I typically release a more generally freedom-related episode. Today I'm releasing an episode, as a matter of fact, about the war on drugs, called The War on Drugs is a War on Freedom. And I think people might find that of interest because I think there's a lot of overlap between the war on drugs and the war on guns. And of course, anytime the government declares a war on something, you pretty much know it's going to be a disaster, and whatever the problem is they are pretending to help, they're probably going to make worse. And I think that the war on drugs is a great example of that. Of course, drugs are more dangerous and more prolific and available than they ever have been, and hundreds of thousands of people are dying from them every year. So check that out if you want. It'll be released tonight, as a matter of fact, at 9 o'clock here in just a little less than half an hour. And of course, tune in Monday for the firearms episode about the Liberty Safe situation.
That is one, unfortunately, we do not have, because that's a whole half hour in and of itself. We don't have time to get into that tonight, but so go check out Alex's channel, and the link for that specific episode 57 is in the comment section, both on Facebook and on YouTube. So go check that out. But yeah, if we were to get into Liberty Safes, I spent a good 20 minutes on that solo yesterday. We would totally blow our time out. I do want to say to everybody, thank you for watching. Podcast listeners, thank you for listening. Please do come join me 7 p.m. Central Time tomorrow night for the Weekend Review Show, The Weekend Bullet. Until then, everybody, we will see you next time.